It's been a ride. I guess I had to go to that place to get to this one. Now, some of you might still be in that place.
Well, welcome, everyone, to today's program. This is Deborah Tavares with StopTheCrime.net on the Rinse Radio Network. We have several urgent advisories that we want to make everyone aware of right now before we get into the meat of the show. It has been reported to us from contacts out of Germany that the targeted community, the targeted individuals, are experiencing massively amped up assaults and attacks upon them. For any of you that are listening and are unaware of what targeted individuals are and what is happening to them with being gang-stalked and physically assaulted with directed energy weapons by the Earth Inc. de facto global controllers, you can go to StopTheCrime.net and click on the Mind Control link for more details. Now, we are in a extremely dangerous, parasitic, and predatory reality. We are in a corporate controller government of agencies that have deceived the global population. We're USA Inc., and we are Earth Inc. And sadly, the tragedy of this corporate structure is the illusion of justice, freedom, and democracy. And consent is presumed unless it is denied. This is most urgent that everyone understand this basis, because what you're going to be hearing today on the program is nothing short of horrific. And everyone that is listening, go to StopTheCrime.net. I urge you to download a free download, a book entitled The Great American Adventure, Secrets of America, and also go to USA Inc. and understand what Senate Report 93549 tells you. The government has been abolished. In 1933, we suddenly were bankrupted. America's gold was stolen. All Americans during that period of time were collateralized against the debt. Our land, our sweat equity, our children, and our souls. This has been told to us in countless documents, and Senate Report 93549 identifies us as the enemy, and Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars tells us war has been declared. They are now using a silent weapons system and systems at speed of light. So who is really running the entire global structure? Well, we're going to talk about that fact, and everyone needs to realize we are not. And what I'm going to do right now, because I need everyone to understand the importance and urgency as our children enroll in school coming up, they're going to be required more frequently now to have vaccinations. This is all weaponized, and this is happening this coming year. California has passed a law requiring children be vaccinated, and the opt-outs are going to become more difficult to obtain. And we also have, again, a reminder that Wi-Fi must be removed from all schools globally. It must be removed from all of our neighborhoods. And this is just in from the telecommunications, one agency here in Northern California. This is extremely important to understand that the industry has concurred that each carrier needs at least one cell site or antenna site for every 75 housing units. That's about one cell site every quarter of a mile for each carrier in a typical suburban community. And what we need to understand is that the wave of the future is the distributed antenna system, which will go onto the utility posts in the public rights of way. In California, and our California Public Utility Commission gives the carriers and the tower companies control within the public right-of-way. So we have lost local control. We are at war. We are identified as the enemy. And it's also important to know another situation that's occurring within the telecom industry is that there's a multi-step plan underway nationally by the wireless industry to deregulate or preempt local zoning authorities. The industry has been successful in getting certain legislation passed at the state level in a few states, particularly in the South. Now, it's important to understand legislation at a state level. Our local, state, and federal governments are not real. It's an illusion to keep people compliant as this corporate structure that does not identify life, does not observe nature, and is in the process of decimating everything on the planet. So it's extremely important to understand the basics, where this has come from, why we are having the kind of talk today that we are going to have. Now, I'm very happy to be talking to Lorraine Moret. She's a friend, and we've been talking for quite some time. And I want to just tell you that Lorraine is a Lawrence Livermore Lab whistleblower. She's also a geoscientist and a highly recognized international expert on radiation. And we're going to be not only discussing the fact that there is a global secret nuclear war happening right now for mass genocide, but we're also going to be talking about the Wigner effect. And I would really like for you to jump in, Lorraine, right now and explain this Wigner effect, because I find this rather horrific that the entire infrastructure is being positioned to fall apart.
Deborah?
So, do I have you? I hear you fine. Yes.
Oh, yes,
I was hoping that you could jump in and let everyone know about the Wigner effect.
Oh, you want me to tell right now?
Whatever you'd like, but that just really jumps out at me because what we have is, of course, the attack on the entire infrastructure, including our bodies. People need to understand the levels of radiation, and when we were talking off air, I was really struck by that. Many things that we talked about, but that just really jumped out.
Yes, that's correct. The Wigner effect was discovered at the Oak Ridge Nuclear Weapons Laboratory in the 1950s by Dr. Wigner. He was from Germany or Austria. And he was doing research on metals and ceramics. He started the department, in fact, to study the effects of radiation on metals and ceramics, because at that time they wanted to start a nuclear power program in the United States. And what he discovered is that constant bombardment or bombardment from energy from the nucleus of radioactive atoms, that would be neutrons, alpha particles, beta and gamma rays and X-rays, that over time those radioactive energy coming out of the nucleus, whatever it hits, it causes it to decay or to fall apart or to turn to dust or into illnesses in living things. And that has not been mentioned at all with regard to the global effect and impact that the Fukushima radiation is having on the entire planet.
And Lorraine, you're exactly right. That has not been mentioned, and that's why I really wanted to kick off with this, because what we've heard quite a bit lately is, of course, the pulsed microwave frequencies and how that creates fatigue and destroys structural integrity and causes damage and ultimately destruction of all matter. But we're talking about this as being far more powerful in its destructive nature, and the fact that many people now are going to be expending monies to create repairs in their homes, replacement of water heaters, broken lines, impoverishing property owners as continued decline in all of our structures and bridges occur. which radiation is far more than the pulsed microwave frequencies.
Well, the electromagnetic frequencies, which include microwaves, are bad enough, but those frequencies are generated on the Earth. The energy that's released from the nucleus of atoms, radioactive atoms, is much, much, much greater than the frequencies are releasing. And it's because the atoms, matter, all of the atoms, the elements that are the building blocks of matter, are formed in very energetic and very intense energy regimes. For instance, uranium and plutonium are formed in supernovas. So when that energy is released from the atomic nucleus of a uranium or a plutonium particle or atom, that is a tiny piece of a supernova that's being released in your body. Our bodies are basically a bag of water. So 85 or 90 or 95% of the body is water. So what do you think happens when you drop a piece of supernova into a bag of water? It's not a good day for the cells around that particle or that ray. And in the environment, the Wigner effect is especially bad on metals. So not only is the Fukushima nuclear power plant falling apart, and the workers have spoken about that many times on blogs, it's reported in the media, in interviews with them, and they say every day it gets worse at Fukushima. The tanks, they have thousands of tanks of highly contaminated water. There's so much radioactivity at Fukushima now, especially from these tanks of water, but also all of the radiation, the particles that were produced and the dust that was produced from the explosions, that the whole plant is glowing, not just inside the border of the plant, but outside of the plant in the civilian area. Mixed oxide fuels with uranium and plutonium. But when you have uranium with one melting point in those fuel rods and plutonium with a different melting point, you have a very complex system that is unstable, it's unpredictable, and they actually interact with each other. And what they produce when the MOX fuel melts in a disaster like Fukushima is that that mixed oxide liquid plutonium and uranium mixture starts pulsing neutrons. These are neutrons that are very powerful. They travel hundreds of miles. And then you have episodes in between the pulses of blow-ups or blowouts. They're explosions. And so that's what was happening at Fukushima. There would be pulsing in the molten fuel, and then there would be an explosion. And that was blowing fuel rods up in the air. They landed miles and miles and miles from Fukushima all over the countryside. And the particles, the dust that was produced from these very high temperatures, a lot of them were nanoparticles. They have traveled all over the world, and they've been caught in filters in Norway just a couple of weeks after the explosions. And
now, Loren, originally they were talking about the use of robots, and of course you were talking about the fact that with the fatigue of the Wigner effect, the robots are falling apart, and they can't use robots any longer. And you also mentioned that they have built a wall around the plant that is now just becoming nothing but marsh. And that the entire Japanese community is faced with being given toxic food by their de facto government to the schools and fed to the children.
That's correct. The entire plant is falling apart. The reactor buildings are so high in radioactivity they can't send human beings into them. Most of the workers have died who were there in the beginning. Those were the trained, experienced workers. They're using homeless people and drunks, and the Yakuza, or the Japanese mafia, go and find these people, and they're bringing these completely unskilled people into the plant, and basically they're just sacrificed. And the state of the plant now is that because they were trying to stop the radioactive water from flowing into the ocean, so they built this tank farm there, filled up all the tanks, and then they said, oh my God, we have no place to put all this water, we're out of tanks. So they built a wall underground around the reactor buildings, and that's filled up with water now, contaminated groundwater, and the buildings are sinking into the ground. It's like a marshland, and every day everything is more and more unstable there, and the robots that they tried to send in because they couldn't send humans in, the radiation is so high that it destroys the robot, the electronic components, and especially attacks metals, thin metals. So what's happening now is the airline industry is having emergency landings, particularly in the Pacific region, where commercial aircraft are flying through the radioactive air column, which is contaminated all the way into lower orbital space. Pilots are dropping dead, and one airline in Japan, an internal airline, had to cancel 1,700 flights through next fall because their pilots are all dying and they couldn't get replacement pilots. Three other airlines have had to also cancel flights because of damage to the fuselage of the planes from the Wigner effect. And Christina Consolo, who is known as Radchick, recently flew to Utah. This would be in June of 2014. And she had 4 different planes that she had to make changes onto during the flights. And she came back with photos of patches on top of patches on top of patches with rivets holding the patches on the airplane wings and fuselage. And also the wings were taped to heal metal tears and embrittlement on the wings. And this is called airplane tape. It's very, very adhesive, and it was designed particularly in particular for airplanes.
Now, Loren, we were talking about now the fact that they have self-repairing patches now on the fuselage. Could you talk about that? Because that's rather shocking to people that don't realize this kind of technology.
No, these are not self-healing patches. These are now proposed for planes in the future. They have to redesign the whole entire airline industry now in order to keep planes in the air.
I wanted to throw something in right now because we were talking about how the airplanes are falling apart because of the Wigner effect. And I found something today that was very concerning and interesting at the same time. It's an investment group, and it's called the Graphene, Graphene, revolution and how this is the future. And it's posted on the Outsider Club because you'll never be on the inside. And it was dated July the 7th of 2014. And it says, graphene is the future, plain and simple. It's 200 times stronger than steel. It's thinner than a sheet of paper and more conductive than copper. And it talks about how solar will be 50 times to 100 times more effective, semiconductors 50 to 100 times faster, aircraft will be 70% lighter. But I found this to be interesting. And even the potential to make people and things completely invisible. Now, for those that are listening again, this is called graphene, Graphene. We will have that posted on stopthecrime.net under the quick links where you will then be able to click on hot radio show topics. And Loren, I also wanted to give everyone your website, which is Loren Moret, LEURENMORET. Again, LEURENMORET, so that you can go to Loren's site and take a look at the information that she has put up there for you to see about the Fukushima. But we were getting ready to talk about Caroline Kennedy.
Deborah, the website is lorenmoret.info.
Oh, terrific. I'm glad that you caught that.
Yes.
Okay, .info. Yes. So everyone that's listening, lorenmoret.info. And we were getting ready to talk about what has happened now to Caroline Kennedy as a result.
Caroline Kennedy was appointed to Japan as ambassador. I think it was announced last fall. And there was a short debate, and finally she decided to go. I said, oh my God, how could they do that? This is the assassination of the last Kennedy, of John F. Kennedy's immediate family. She was announced at the end of May. There was press conferences and everything with her darling son by her side. He looks just like a Kennedy. And they were in white paper or plastic protective gear, which radiation goes right through. And they had gas masks and covering on, but the radiation, the tiny particles go right through the filters. And they were doing a tour of the Fukushima nuclear power plant that's more radioactive now than it has been since sometime after the explosions. And not only that, there's an immediate danger at all times of hypervolcanic underground explosions that spew radioactive steam all over the plant. And even the lagoon in front of the power plant has radioactive fog and steam from the molten fuel that melted down 80 feet into the ground, and it's flowing into that lagoon now. So poor Caroline Kennedy, who wanted to do something for Japan because her father was very much in favor of Japan and some of their policies and so forth. The Japanese people loved President Kennedy. So this promise of hope and retribution or an apology to Japan for the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings is going to end up in the shortening of her life and her son's.
Well, this is an assassination by stealth and deception and by the silent weapons system. And we're all facing that because I know, Loren, many people are asking, well, is there any safe place to go? Certainly we would not go to Japan. But people are saying, well, let's go south of the equator. And let's talk about that, because you said something to me pretty profound about the equatorial protection and how that has now been disproven.
Yes, during bomb testing, the very complex mechanism of circulation in the atmosphere and the oceans, it's by vortexes, it's little tiny circulations at all scales, and it causes complete global mixing in 1 year of the radiation or any pollution that's being released into the ocean or the atmosphere. And this radiation is actually being geoengineered with this new HARP system, which is a whole new weapon of mass destruction based on Tesla technologies. And what they can do is they can draw cold air from Japan full of radiation, cold moist air down over the equator and into the southern hemisphere, where they mix it with cold Arctic air, and then they just funnel it like shooting it out of a hose. It's called fluid dynamics. And by creating high pressure and low pressure fences, they can just steer it right into Southeast Asia and onto
welcome
Europe.
Back. We are now in the final segment of today's program, Loren. And I wanted to back up just for a moment. I know you were still in conversation about how the radiation was confronting certain aspects in Canada and the capital here in the United States, the de facto United States government, that is. But previously you had talked about how the radiation could literally be steered to contaminate targeted populations. And this gets into the question that I'm sure I'm asked all the time. Is there any safe place to move or to be safe from this radiation?
The best places to be when radioactive pollution is in the atmosphere or there are serious nuclear accidents and so forth are desert areas. You want to be in arid areas where there's minimal rainfall, moisture in the air, and snow. And so there are arid areas, for instance, in parts of South America, in Mexico, and other places around the world, and those would be or should be the first choice for people to consider in terms of where they go.
Well, now the only question I would have here, Loren, is because we know that the weather is weaponized and they can steer it, they can create rain, they can turn an arid area into a lush green area if they so desired. So really now, with the weaponization of weather, I'm just wondering how viable that is for people, because we're seeing California right now in a horrible drought. We certainly are becoming an arid area, but I think we're being pummeled with radiation.
And chemtrails. This is an artificial drought. We actually have higher than normal rainfall in California, and we have for 12 years. We're not in a drought. And just to prove that, the most severe drought damage symptoms that are being exhibited by plants and trees in California are along the coastline, where the highest moisture normally is. The fog and the dampness and the rain, the storms that come from the Pacific keep the coastlines much moister. So why would we have drought-like symptoms there? And in the interior, in very dry areas, the trees are thriving, or they're less damaged than along the coastlines. That doesn't make sense.
Well, I can tell you this, Loren, this is all part of the global policies now being funneled through the de facto government, through the executive branch, via executive orders. And right now, they're implementing policies that require all of us to reduce our water consumption. In fact, I just attended a water meeting today, and they're going to start with the neighborhood monitoring of any people that have water runoff, and ultimately your water could be turned off. And so we know now that this is just all an ecocide, literally mass extermination, massive profits for the corporations. But I wanted you to bring in what we talked about, where the highest death rates in the United States were in Texas, and talk about that, because we're nearing the end of the show today, or the program, and I really want people to hear what you had to say about the 18, 19, and 20-year-olds.
Well, the impact of Fukushima on public health in the United States by the end of 2011 was that over 100,000 Americans had already died from the Fukushima radiation. And the highest death rate increases were in the areas where weather and geography facilitate rain out and snow out of the radiation. So on the west slope of the Rocky Mountains, it was the highest death rates overall for the population. But the highest group by age in the United States, the highest death rates, over 18%, were in Texas, and they were in 18-year-olds and young people, and they are the soldiers who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, who are already very badly contaminated with neutron bomb damage and the depleted uranium exposure, and the death rates are over 18% in that age group.
Now, you were saying that they're literally dying near or on the bases, and they're contaminating their families, and no one's talking about this.
That's right.
There is absolutely no news coverage. The censuses are misreporting our population numbers now. We are being so massively deceived. It is an absolute tragedy and public deception. And
the media has completely failed us, but who owns the media? It's the bankers and the industrialists who have created these weapons, who have caused these disasters. And this is not just Fukushima. This has gone on decade after decade. And it's all a global eugenics or depopulation program. They're targeting any population they want to. And right now, the biggest land grab in world history is happening. Well, I shouldn't say that because of colonization. But this is a new colonization by the New World Order. And the populations in Canada, the U.S., and Mexico and Japan are being severely depopulated through radiation. And the U.S. is basically being turned over to the Chinese.
Well, it sounds very grim. It is certainly, people are going to shrug. They're going to say, well, if we're done, what can I do? What's the point? Well, I can say that not doing anything and being quiet is your consent. And there are ways in which we can work to get this information out to people. There are protective things that we can do. We need to be eating correctly and drinking the correct water, trying to stay alive and healthy as long as we can, given the massive amounts of assaults that have been perpetrated on us, not only, of course, through our indoctrination of education, but in our air, water, and food supply, and, of course, the de facto government. I think, most importantly, Loren, people just need to get out of this slumber of representative government and understand we are not represented. We are being genocided right now in every way possible. Now, I know you were also saying that every single nuclear facility is a weaponized, planned, strategically placed, and sited location. Can you talk about that? We've got a couple of minutes left in the program today.
There are many remedies and mechanisms and recommendations on my website, lorenmoret.info, in lifestyles on how people can protect themselves. I just want to mention that. And drinking water and avoiding dairy products are the two most important considerations. Now, going back to your question, oh dear, I just forgot it. What was your question?
Well, I was just asking about basically people's inability to consider how massive all this is.
Yes. What we must do is to not count on anyone else to help us. The Japanese have taken the initiative, as they did after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, to act at the local level, to build neighborhood and community, and to discover new, very simple items that are around us all the time, and use those. Share the information. The most important thing, I think, in terms of diet is from a medical doctor in the Fukushima prefecture. And when Fukushima happened, he put his family and his workers on a macrobiotic diet. They eat brown rice, miso, which is fermented soybean paste. It makes a very nice soup, but you can do other things with it. Tsukimono, which is the Japanese pickled vegetable. I make it in jars and put it in the refrigerator. It's delicious. It's just water, a tablespoon of vinegar, some garlic. You can put raw turnips, raw beets. You can make it out of any vegetable, cabbage, all kinds of things. And I buy macrobiotic sauerkraut, pour the juice out, and I use that as a starter in these jars of Japanese pickled vegetables that I make. And man, when you eat that stuff with the brown rice and the miso, it's so satisfying. You don't need to snack between meals.
Well, Loren, I think what you're saying right now is very important, because we just came off a global genocide program on multiple layers with frequencies and the poisoning of the food, the water, and the air supply. And in the midst of all of this, we need to also live. In the matrix and wonder, as this continues to implode city by city, neighborhood by neighborhood, as it is, people will understand, and we need to live in right conduct going forward. And as you so appropriately said, we can't depend on anyone at this point, but what we do need to do is get this information out far and wide and have people understand this is our reality. And we have been deceived massively. Again, the local, state, and federal governments are not real. And we have been indoctrinated through expert programming and conditioning, and even prejudice and patriotism, to treat information like you're hearing right now as being ridiculous, absurd, and untrue. And everything that we're telling you is fully documented. There's documents on Loren's website, documents on StopTheCrime.net that substantiate every single thing that we are articulating to you right now. Now, Loren, we're coming up on the last few minutes of the program today. We're right there. Thank you so much for joining us today, Loren. Love to have you back up on the program again soon.